I'm writing a special intelligence report for a client about news bias. And I'm going to share with you in today's call of Inside Strategic Relations a little bit about news bias and how to recognize it, and some common biases that are happening right now. I'm Justin Hitt with Inside Strategic Relations, where we help you think more critically and make better decisions. One of the common news biases that you'll often see is a political organization demonstrating inept behavior. So I'm seeing the NFAC organization shooting themselves is the headline. So great thing about social media today, great thing about YouTube is that you can find these headlines very easily on a wide spectrum of factuality. So the news is believed to be factual. In fact, it is just a means to sell advertising. It's a means to, quote, inform the public about current events and trends, but it can also be manipulated in such a way to present bias and political opinion. Everybody agrees on that, whether you're on the left or the right or the center. The news is a business, and they're in the business of making money. And so this happens. So here I see this NFAC. If you don't know who NFAC is, it is an activist group that promotes firearm ownership. And they are aligned with Black Lives Matter. They're aligned with possibly the Black Panthers. They're aligned with the Socialist Gun Club. But they're also an independent organization of themselves. It's too complex to go into the relationship details here. Just understand that these individuals are more aligned with protesters about current events than they are about the anti-protest, which is kind of staying in their home, and it's more CNN than it is Fox News. So I hope I've set up that context correctly for you to understand where we're going here. The headline is NFAC shooting themselves. You're going to see photographs of them putting their rifle butts in the ground, their rifle barrels pointing in the ground, actually on the ground. You're going to see a lot of photographs of mishandling of weapons. You're going to see a lot of photographs that present them as inept. Now, is the organization inept? Well, there's no way for me to know, but I do know from the general demeanor of the organization, their website, and their what footage is available, that they're not likely 100% inept. So the news presentation is in some channels is that they're 100% inept. In other channels, it's their good, rightful organization that's expressing certain values, and then in the middle, there's no mention at all of the organization. So here's what's important to understand. There are organizations, there are charitable groups, there are beneficial advocacies, there are unbeneficial advocacies that might be mentioned, not mentioned at all, or mentioned in a negative light. So they could be mentioned positively, neutrally, or negatively, or not at all. Each of those are media bias positions. A balanced presentation is not possible in the majority of high-profile cases. So we're talking about Epstein. Epstein has the potential to know things about high, powerful people that those powerful people don't want in the news. And until that's been properly handled, the news is going to speculate. There really isn't any way to report on that in a balanced, non-biased way. So the news people report, it's something people are interested in. They sell advertising space on it. And ultimately, the news channel wins more than anybody else. So I'm writing this intelligence report, and I'm covering these different biases. But we all know that they're there in the media. You can flip on any news station. If you know anything about that current event, you know what you're seeing in the news is only a very small piece of that information. This is what's important about that. When you recognize this bias in media, you can leverage the media that supports your position as a credible source of evidence that your position is right. You can also use media that goes against your position or a strongly held position to demonstrate how there's opposition and the importance is there to support your position. There's a variety of ways that you can use the media, whether it is 100% accurate or 100% inaccurate or any level in between. The key is understanding it, is understanding that position. This is called public relations. How do you interact with the public? Let's say you have an organization who is currently not participating in certain initiatives that are national. So your state says wear masks, but your store allows you customers to approach with no mask. What is the publicity angle? Do you even want publicity in that case? If you're going to have publicity, what counter arguments would there be to your position, and what arguments would there be for your position? Unfortunately, many businesses are doing press releases like nothing. They'll go get a $99 press release and they'll get it out in front of the papers, and then it backfires. Some organizations are trying hard to hide small little problems that if the public knew about it, they'd understand and not have a big deal with it. Ultimately, where's your position? We know the media is biased. That's the facts. That's the reality of life. How do you interact with that media so that you have the best benefit? Because there's also a function called cognitive bias. If you're looking at media and you say, well, this media is not biased, okay? Maybe you're not looking for the key phrases. Maybe you're not understanding the nuances or language patterns. You may not be going through and mapping every contributor to that article and their organizations. You're not looking up their political contributions. You're not going down and drilling down into the corporations who advertise during that spot in favor of the majority position of the article itself. You may not be looking at secondary and tertiary relationships. You may be simply reading an article and saying that article is not biased. In that case, it is very likely the article has some kind of cognitive bias where it closely matches your position. So there are comedians that make fun of this. So, for example, they talk about one person describes a situation. Actually, this is a perfect one. There is a comedian talking about taking photography for news channels. And they talked about a business opportunity where you could, a guy's name's Ryan Long, and he's talking about how you can take pictures, and depending on the headline of the picture, you can sell it to Fox News. And if you change the headline, you can sell it to CNN. That same thing happens in our everyday news. Now, here's where the problem lies. Let's say you're about to do a business investment. And maybe you're going to buy a brown site, which is a site that previously had environmental contamination. And you're going to clean up the brown site using federal funds in order to get the property not only at a cheap price up front because nobody else wants it, but because it's going to be maybe an industrial pad in the future anyway, you can remediate the situation. And then with the remediation in place, the federal funds have lowered your cost basis to own the property, and you can install a building. Now, I know a lot of folks, you guys are not thinking about this. That's not your position. But that could be worth millions of dollars to you over the lifetime of the property if you understand how the public relations works and how your basis in knowledge, your ethical position is set. You can make this a good story. You can make this good news. However, you need to be aware of how it could potentially be made wrong, bad news. So, for example, let's say you've got buried fuel tanks that leaked in the past, and the fuel tanks have been capped. Now, this is a real situation. These big diesel fuel tanks have been capped. It's been remediated. You want to build a building, but the building would be over top of these tanks. So these tanks have got to come out of the ground. So they're safe the way they are. They've been addressed according to EPA standards, but in order to build your building, you got to take these tanks out of the ground, and so you're actually asking for the state fund for managing these kinds of things to provide some money to take those tanks out of the ground. Now, you could just go and get the tanks out of the ground and build your building and not have any public interaction. You don't have to have a news coverage of this. Unfortunately, your competitor who did not get to buy the property and wanted that property but wasn't willing to pay the price that you paid, decides to do an op-ed piece under a family member's name to mention how this site had the big fuel leak of 1982 and how this site is damaged, and then you out there disturbing the soil are going to potentially ruin local wildlife. And if you just leave the property alone, there wouldn't be this problem. See, it goes from the news not knowing and not caring and not having a story to somebody who developed a story through a third party using an opt-in as their means of getting it in front of the news channel. And next thing you know, you got reporters out on the site. Now, all these building sites are going to have placards up next to the road, and the placard is going to show what's happening. And yes, there's something being excavated. Yes, it was a previous fuel spill. Yes, it was remediated back in the 1990s. And ultimately, yes, there is an environmental concern. They casually mention this to an environmentalist group, and next thing you know, you've got protests on your site. And you're itching to get rid of this property. Now, again, this is a deliberate activity by a competitor to get you to sell that property at any price. Just to get rid of the damn thing because it's becoming too much trouble. People are starting to protest your business. You don't want people to look too much into your business because no business is perfect. What do you do? Well, unfortunately, this individual did not have my services to help them position and present a program, basically a story, news programming, in order to present the right picture, because this person was legitimately following best practices, was legitimately monitoring a project with extra costs associated with quality assurance to make sure that the job was done correctly. And this individual actually cared significantly about the environment. And if the protesters would have had a 5-minute conversation with this guy, they would have known that he legitimately did not want anything happen to wildlife, and in fact was building this building under the LEED's standards. So it would be low carbon, low energy input, and in fact, everything that these protesters wanted. Unfortunately, it went back and forth. It was a huge mess, and the project got delayed. There were extra costs. All that could have been remediated or addressed in the project planning and how we're going to present this as a positive thing. In fact, this individual could have disclosed early the buried tanks. So they buy the property, and then they talk about how they bought this property and how these buried tanks are problems, and here's all the risk factors we're looking at, and here's what we're doing to solve the problem. So there's a factor of transparency. They could raise that transparency in the news. They could have partnered with the advocacy groups to be third-party monitors on the site. And I could go on. There's a lot of things people can do. Unfortunately, they did not, lost millions of dollars in extra costs getting the building together. The building's there today. It's a beautiful building. It's a wonderful project. If you wanted to dig through the news, you could and find all the details. But here's the most important part. Even if you find the details in the news, you're doing research, you got to be able to recognize what information is biased. What information could be planted there? What information could be omitting critical facts? What information interviews one position and then only lightly touches on the other position? What are the facts? And how do we verify this information? Now, it does often take an intelligence report to get into these details. And depending on the size of your project, it may or may not be worth going into the effort up front. But there are always unintended consequences that can be made worse with media coverage. Media pressure today is worse than it has ever been. As Malcolm X said, and I'm paraphrasing here, the media can make you hate those you should love. The media can show you victims that are actually oppressors, and oppressors present them as victims. It is the truth. The media is like that. Now, again, if you educate yourself and you understand these nuances and you understand how to identify media bias, which is why my private client is investing in this report. They're commissioning this report to be updated. This is how you get ahead and you understand what risk factors could limit you from the outcomes you're looking for. I'm Justin Hitt with Inside Strategic Relations. Inside Strategic Relations helps high-income professionals, executives, and business owners understand the critical thinking factors that help them transform business relationships into profits guaranteed. Thanks for listening. If you have questions about this or any program, visit us at www.insidestrategicrelations.com. Ask your questions and we'll get back with you and get you the right resources that you need. Thanks for listening.